What is poppin'? It is the Slaptain. I am but a lowly Slaptain, riding these ReFi waves. And this is This Week in ReFi, where we give you all of the ReFi news that is fit to go ape wild over. Of course, with me is the man with the plan, the man with the perpetual summer tan, the Estonian madman, the man of the hour, the man with the power, the man who's so sweet he's never sour. Leader of the regenerative finance vanguard, Sir Rez.
Hello, it's me.
And sandwiched between Slaptain and Rez is the indoor arborist, extreme weather enthusiast, founder, and CPO of Jasmine Energy, Dalton.
Great to be here.
What's going on, bro? We understand you are in the path of the impending apocalyptic storm, Hillary.
Yes, we're going to get this whole podcast in the can before Hurricane Hillary takes down the internet.
That's right. And we were discussing prior to this the folly of referring to a very serious storm, Hillary, because who the hell's going to take that seriously?
The memes, it's all Hillary Clinton memes. It's like Hillary Clinton dancing through California.
Yeah, making you Pokemon go to a polls. Or, sorry,
Yeah.
Pokemon go to a shelter.
Yeah, Pokemon go to the storm shelter.
Right. So think about all the blood on the hands of the person who named it Hillary. Instead of taking this seriously, it's just people memeing, man. If they had called it anything else, the preparation level would have been much higher. Instead, people are like, we have to meme. We can't go to the store.
Yeah, the next podcast is going to be a post-mortem with a person that named it Hurricane Hillary.
Whoever at NOAA, if it had been Hurricane Hector, right? Like someone's uncle.
Everyone would have went to the store and they would have stocked up and then they would have evacuated, but it was just too alluring, the Hillary part. Well, appreciate you jumping on so early in the morning. We're going to just kind of like have a casual conversation about Jasmine Energy and how you guys are wrecking people. Can we say that? You're wrecking people.
Wrecking people.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, I love that. With 2 C's.
Yeah.
Wrecking people.
Wrecking ReFi. REC.
That's actually really good. I like that. Let's assume, and it's not too much of an assumption, that Rez and I are dunderheads and we don't know what's going on. And you came to us and you're like, hey, I'm the founder of this thing called Jasmine Energy. And we went, hey, man, that sounds really cool. Like, what the heck is that? Like, what would you tell us?
It's about energy finance. It's about making it easier. The big vision is reducing the cost of capital for generators. So generators, like someone who makes electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 3 big things that we have to do with great urgency. One is we have to fully decarbonize the global energy grid. Number 2 is we have to bring a huge amount of our economy onto the electrical grid. So we have to electrify everything is the hashtag. And then we have to expand energy access because people aren't going to want to consume less energy. And every year people want more of it. So we have to do all 3 of those things at the same time. And together that means building a huge amount of renewable energy, and we're not building enough of it. And what can we do to build more of it? The easiest thing is to reduce the cost of capital for generators, improve the ROI for investing in renewable energy. And so that's our jam.
Who would you say is the profile of the generators that you're trying to facilitate? Like, what do they look like, your average generator?
So independent development is big in this space. So there's sort of different phases to how a facility gets built. You go out, you site a piece of land, you raise investment for that, you build it, you put it on the grid, and then you have 20 to 50 years of delivering energy onto the grid. And so those are who the generators are. And the main fundraising vehicle that we're targeting is what's called a power purchase agreement. This is something that you sell right before groundbreaking. It's the main source of the funds for building the facility. And what it is, it's basically a pre-sell of the electrical energy and the RECs of the facility for, let's say, the first 5, 10, 15 years, something on that time scale. So that's the main way. You don't really sell bonds, you don't really raise equity capital. This is what you're selling, you sell the energy, your first few years of energy early.
Do you sell the whole production of the first few years, or how are these deals typically structured?
Yeah, it's usually some high double-digit percentage, but not all of it, because you don't want to overshoot. Because if you oversell, then you have to go on the market and backfill your promise. You have to source energy to fulfill the promise.
All right, and you mentioned this very good term somewhere in here that I think we need to dissect, and those are RECs.
RECs, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought you were going to
Yeah.
go with pre-sale.
So
I thought you were going to talk about that.
we can talk about forwards later if you want to get into forwards.
Yeah, we talked about a lot about forwards like a couple of episodes ago with Stenner. Yeah.
So we'll do RECs first, then we'll talk about forwards. I think that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So a REC, so these are renewable energy certificates. The global term is energy attribute certificates. In the EU, they're called guarantees of origin. In North America, they're called RECs. In the rest of the globe, they're usually called IRECs or international RECs based off the North American standard. And what these are is, so when you put electrical energy onto the grid, it just becomes energy. Like you can't pull just solar off of the grid. If the grid's got a mix, you're pulling whatever's on there. It doesn't make sense to talk about a direct relationship between a particular generator and a particular consumer. And so RECs were invented to solve that problem, where if you wanted to run a facility and consume just renewable energy, these let you create a direct relationship with a specific generator, where you can basically, when they put a megawatt hour onto the grid, they get to mint 1 megawatt hour REC for their solar or their wind or their hydro or however they're categorized. And then that goes to a specific consumer. And when that consumer pulls a megawatt hour off the grid, they get to attach that REC and like reattribute it, right? So that's what energy attributes. These are the attributes of the energy other than its energy. So the attributes come off right before the power goes onto the grid, and then you can reapply them. You can reattribute your energy when you pull it off.
Okay. So if somebody were to come up to you and say, hey, would you like to buy 100% solar energy for your house? You would essentially be buying absolutely normal energy and then a sort of certificate on top of it that the origin of this energy was that particular specific solar plant, for example, right?
Exactly. And so that's how this market works. And you may get these mailers from your utility company where they'll say like, oh, check here and we'll charge you X% more and your house will be 100% solar, or your Tesla will charge on 100% solar, or you can go to the grocery store and buy sun chips that are baked by the sun. Like that marketing slogan is backed by renewable energy certificates.
Is it really?
Or they have they have an electric oven, and then that electric oven is solar powered, not because they have solar panels on the roof necessarily, but because they like have the RECs to power that facility by solar.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And on a marketing level, kind of like a lot more understandable than, for example, the term of carbon neutral, which is kind of this like a bit more ambiguous than, yeah, we're just literally buying solar energy and baking chips with it. What do you want?
Yeah, and that's part of what we love about RECs as an asset category is they are really well understood and it's really clear what they are. There's no these ambiguous concepts like additionality or carbon neutrality. Like you don't have to get into those things. It's just like it is exactly what it says on the paper.
Yeah. A wise man once told me that additionality is bullshit.
It really is.
Yes, we keep saying this on the podcast as a meme forever.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I can never tell, when we're talking to other climate people, like some people take additionality like very seriously, but it just seems like a nonsense concept to me.
It's complicated to say the least, but we like that. That's a spicy take. I think I agree with Dalton. I think Dalton and I would happen to agree more than Rez. I think additionality is so difficult. I mean, it's necessary, right? It's just difficult to pin down.
I don't know that it's necessary. But...
Rez, do you want to go in on this?
Well, ultimately, the question ends up being in carbon credits, how are we avoiding strange kind of like moral hazards, right? Because ultimately, I'm doing a bunch of weird activities that are like kind of avoiding emissions, right? And additionality in this context would mean that is like giving me money to not do those things, like increasing my activity of not doing those things, right? But ultimately, the question then ends up being like, how do we draw these boundaries? Because I don't own a car. Should I be given credits for not owning a car?
Yes.
Yeah, it all hides in this like counterfactual.
Yeah.
Which like it just seems like insurmountably difficult to me to like actually say.
I agree. And avoidance kind of is in this like weird category of avoided emissions always are like avoiding compared to what, right? Like especially when we're talking about RED plus projects where you're protecting rainforests, for example.
Yeah.
Like, what is the baseline we're measuring against is a really complicated topic, right? But it's quite clear that if I gave just money to a forestry company that had a forest for like 2 years and then chopped it down, like that doesn't make any sense either, right? So there is some sort of like logic there that we need to untangle. Additionality ultimately ends up being a lot more clear when we're talking about removals, like putting up new forests or like removing carbon from the air.
Yeah, so DAC, like when you're paying someone to do something,
Yeah.
I wouldn't, I don't even think we need the concept of additionality, is like, because it's just, you're just paying someone to do something. I think additionality is as a concept. Anyway, we don't need to.
No, it's a good thing to.
I don't want to make too many enemies. If
No,
we
that's
talk about
right.
carbon for too long, I'm going to start making enemies.
Well, no, but like to your point, like one of the I've known of what you guys have been doing for a while. We have, I know people that are involved with you guys, and like it's always been exciting the fact that RECs are much more concrete, understandable, graspable, and it's hard to kind of like point to a. I guess you could point to like a batch, like that, like you could with carbon credits. You could point to a batch of them and say like these are shitty. I don't know. Could you do that with RECs? Is that something that you've seen where?
So there's a couple dozen markets for RECs because people want like different standards applied. So like these different compliance markets. So like if you qualify for the compliance market, then you comply. Like then you qualify. Like it's just like a standard. And the same thing with the voluntary market has come to an agreement, like it's sort of organized around a voluntary standard, which is called Greenie, and that's managed by this one particular nonprofit. And they set the standard, and they're sort of the neutral body, the neutral judge of, does this REC meet the standard? And then everyone just kind of complies with that standard. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't qualify. So Hoover Dam RECs don't qualify. Nuclear RECs don't qualify for this voluntary standard. It has to be a fairly recent facility, has to be either wind, solar, or what's called run-of-river hydro. There's like maybe one biomass facility in North America that qualifies as well, but it's a very high bar for these. They're not in any particular compliance market, but they're what companies use to meet these voluntary 100% solar claims.
So why doesn't the Hoover Dam qualify? That's interesting.
Two reasons. One is too old. So companies want to invest in, they want to have some idea that their money is going to support new solar, and they want this to be like an incentive for newer facilities. So it can't be older than 15 years, the generator. And then there are the environmental attributes of these full canyon dams are, a lot of people don't like them for environmental reasons.
Yeah,
they're problematic.
Yeah.
And so it has to be run-of-river hydro. So things like where you take a small generator and put it in either an offshoot of a river or in a canal where it's not like a biome kind of thing. It's not disrupting a biome. Those can qualify. But the Hoover Dam, because it's a full
it's like terraforming the planet, like in a very specific kind of way. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, we've seen that in the carbon market, I think, a lot as well. Like hydro ends up being like relatively problematic because it does have these like unforeseen consequences, or not necessarily unforeseen, but like it does change the natural landscape of what's happening because it exists there. So it's a lot less clear of a case than like just having like solar panels where you once had like farmland or something.
Yeah, no, you get a whole river, and that river submerges a forest, and then that forest turns into a bog, and now you've got methane forming at the bottom of your new lake. Yeah, all of those things.
Yeah,
which we don't want. And the nuclear, just for standard reasons, right? Like,
vibes, mostly bad vibes.
For vibes, yes.
It's just bad vibes.
Yes, no bad vibes. We don't like bad vibes in our energy. I heard like nuclear bombs exist, therefore nuclear plants horrible. Can't do it.
Right.
Can't do it.
That's right.
We don't want it to explode.
It's fascinating. Like if you say 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or Fukushima, like everybody knows what that means. Like I think that there's been really strong anti-marketing against nuclear. That's like either intentional or just captured by our zeitgeist of new technology that can be explosive, like scary sort of shit.
Yeah, nuclear, I mean, it goes back a long way. I think that if I had to pick a thing of like what happened to nuclear, it's like two things. One is nuclear never had any powerful friends.
That's right.
Like it was, the oil industry was against it. It had a lot of enemies and no friends. Right? Like the oil industry has a lobby. solar has a lobby. And then the other thing is it got tied in with the military industrial complex, right? It got tied in with anti-war movement. Like, the anti-war movement was anti-nuclear. The first reactor designs were more about creating bomb material really than power. Like they had this cogeneration mandate where they're supposed to make both electrical energy and bomb material, and so that kind of messed up the way we think about reactor design. And I think those are the main two things kind of boofed nuclear. Like it could have gone very differently if we had designed that first generation of reactor differently.
Yeah.
There's very few technologies that I can think of that has inflamed the radical right and the radical left, right? So to your point, it's like the very conservative like hydrocarbon like right lobby hates it, and then the very extreme left lobby hates it. Like I can't think of very many things that are hated by both sides of the political spectrum in terms of technology, but therein lies nuclear. Rez and I are big nuclear shins, by the way.
Now vaccines.
That's right. Yeah, for good point.
But yeah, we're huge nuclear shills on this podcast because like
it's the greatest engineering achievement in the history of man, and we pretend like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it's like you need a sustainable source of electricity to go alongside the renewable energy sources ultimately, because solar and wind aren't necessarily like 100%.
Yeah, how are we going to handle it? Intermittency. Yeah, there are other plans for intermittency, but yeah. I'm also a nuclear fan. Again, it's not my fight. I try not to say anything too crazy. I try not to talk about carbon after more than one drink. Like I try not to talk about nuclear after more than one drink. Because it's just...
It is interesting. So now I got to ask this, like, how did you get to Rex? What was your path to Rex? Like, as opposed to, like, did you look at carbon and say, like, F this, and then you went somewhere else? Like, what was your way you got there?
We spend a lot of time talking to carbon people because we are in this sort of climate and energy finance, but it really was like we started with the generator. So Nathalie brought it to my attention. So my co-founder, and her journey to Rex was she, before Jasmine, she was doing grid scale battery design. So she was doing automotive scale battery design, and then she was looking at, well, what are we going to do with all of these automotive batteries? And she was looking at, okay, can we just park these like still usable but not perfect condition batteries near solar facilities and like make grid scale batteries out of them? And she'd go out to these renewable generators and ask them, okay, so how do you think about your finances? Show me your books. And a lot of them had Bitcoin mining facilities on site. And that's because Bitcoin mining is a great way to shed load. So if the price of energy is ever going to go negative and you're a generator, if you just have a shipping container full of miners, and in the summer, like in the fall and spring, Texas needs to shed a lot of load, but other parts of the country need to shed load at different parts of the year. You can move these container ships around. And so she was looking at that sort of thing, and that kind of sparked in her like, okay, what else? This is something I didn't know about your P&L. What else is on your P&L? And then she found Rex and the way that fits into people's financing. Like, oh, and she was talking to these very crypto friendly. So the generators, we found people who were in energy finance and climate finance, but were very crypto forward. And they had this asset that they had a lot of difficulty getting rid of. And like this asset they had a lot of difficulty working with because they didn't like calling a broker and going through the way that Rex work today.
Yeah.
And so we leaned in on that.
I love it. It's like Rex as a concept is like one of these like perfect crypto use cases, because it is like a symbolic indicator of value that has no storage costs.
Yes, there's no carry cost. It's a digitally native asset.
Exactly. And it's a digitally native asset. You can move it around. This is what crypto infrastructure ultimately serves the best. But This is just like a perfect use case, really, for crypto.
Yeah, there's no, people, I saw a tweet today about someone getting a hard money loan on a tokenized Pokemon card. And that's cute, but it doesn't feel like it's really what crypto works well for.
Tokenized Pokemon card.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
I love it.
But yeah, they're digitally native assets. And the whole thing you want that transparency. And the industry still struggles with the transparency of everything from mint to burn being transparent. Like we still have back office auditors where you call someone in and you open the books and that person walks out of the room and says, yeah, they're doing everything right. Right, we still have these back office audits
For a
which is
digital
crazy
asset.
and actually, yeah, and very expensive in
Yeah.
the space. Like a lot of capital gets burned in these back office audits.
For a digital asset that you could programmatically enforce correct like behavior on, essentially.
Exactly, and you could link the claim, and so that's what we're working on as well, is like showing people like when they make this claim of baked by the sun, having that whole attestation chain in public of like who generated the electricity, who signed off on the minting of the asset, who burned it, and for what audit year, and all of that just right in public.
Brilliant.
So what does your infrastructure look like, or how are you, one of the things you said is, you want to basically create like, I believe liquid and fair markets. You want to bring capital to the space. Like, so how is this achieved?
Yes. What we do is the architecture overall is very similar to Toucan. Drew a lot of inspiration from their tokenization model. So we connect to the same infrastructure provider that built Vera's registry. They actually
APX, yeah, owned by
Yes.
Expansive. Yes.
Expansive.
Yeah.
Right. And these are first and foremost energy companies. So I don't know if you know this, but before Vera, APX built almost all of the REC registries in North America. Like that's where they got their start, was APX built for RECs. And then one day said like, oh, these registries that we use for renewable energy certificates, we could do carbon as well. And then they built a registry for Vera on the same infrastructure. And so we integrate with those. And anyone who has a REC on one of those registries, and basically the registries are broken up by grid. So you can't send an electron from LA to New York today, or New York to Florida. Like there are fragmented grids in North America, and so each grid has its own registry. And if you want to tokenize any of those, you can send them to us on the appropriate registry. We'll hold the certificate out of circulation, and we'll give you a token that represents that certificate. Anyone who brings us, these are 1155s, anyone who brings us back that token can get the underlying asset if they have an account on that registry. If not, they can still burn the token, and we'll destroy the underlying asset in their name. We'll retire it in their name. And then, so that's the 1155, that's the bridge, taking certificates, turning them into tokens, and vice versa. And then we have a layer on top of that where I talked about these commodity categories of it works for this compliance market, it works for that compliance market, this one is valid in the voluntary market, this one is valid for this market over here. The one that we're looking at real closely right now is the market for green hydrogen tax credits. And so every certificate is marked that way. And then we have pools of everything in this pool is compliance. Let's say New York compliance market. Everything in this pool is eligible for greeny hydrogen tax credits. Everything in this pool is eligible for the voluntary market. And those are ERC20s, much more fungible, much more liquid, and then people trade those. Yeah, that's the basics of the infrastructure today.
Okay. So there's a two-way bridge, is that fair to say, or like a mechanism to seamlessly go back and forth?
So if you wanted to, you could get your REC back on the original registry, right?
Yes. If you want the certificate back, you can get the certificate back.
Okay.
Very cool.
If you have an account on those registries, which is like difficult, and one of the big things that we're abstracting away is like, because even for many of the generators, it's a difficult setup.
Oh.
And so we're helping generators get through that setup process, because it's separate than getting set up to sell energy. You also have to get set up to sell your RECs, and it's a different system.
Well, yeah, you would need to, I guess, first set up the infrastructure to create the RECs, right? Like, who is issuing these exactly?
Yeah, the same person who sends a power bill.
Oh.
So again, this is why like MEV, or not MEV, MRV is fairly straightforward in the REC space, because it's the people who send power bills. And so they're very good at monitoring energy flow onto and off of the electrical grid. And so they're the ones who issue RECs.
Okay, and that explains why there are, I would assume, like 4 different registries in the US, because there are 4 major grids in the US?
Yeah, technically 9 in North America.
Oh, wow.
And it's because, yeah, it's not just the major, you're thinking like Eastern Grid, Western Grid, ERCOT. that kind of breakdown.
Yeah, I've heard there's like an East Coast, West Coast, Texas because they're special, and then like something in the middle, right? But
yeah, they're cut a little thinner than that. And this is like grid, the difference in grid operators and like RTOs versus ISOs. Anyway, there's 9.
So one of the things I was thinking as you were explaining this is like, Vera did not like the tokenization of their credits. Like they've put it.
Yeah.
Is there any entity or corollary that could do something similar and say like, hey guys, we're not cool with you tokenizing this shit?
Yes and no. So some of these are common carriers. They're like run by the government, and they have like a common carrier sort of obligations. We're about to announce some explicit endorsements, those entities, some of them. And then there are some that could freak out. But the nice thing about all of these registries is they have really good interop. So if one freaks out, we can fairly trivially migrate all of the assets to one of the ones that has explicitly endorsed.
Yeah, because they're all interconnected, you could just essentially use the other registry to route through, and then you're not even cut off. You're essentially just mildly inconvenienced at best.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
That's so cool.
And they have worked out those protocols before we showed up on the scene. Right, so there's a mechanism to say like, oh, I want to move this rec from registry A to registry B, and they have back office protocols for that. And we might have to do some phone calls, but none of our customers would like experience any service interruptions.
That's awesome. Have you been in touch with these registries, and what's their feedback been like? Are they excited? Do they understand what you're doing?
I think that they're all very interested in what we're doing. They've heard of tokenization before. This is sort of a second or third wave of tokenization enthusiasm, right? Where people have come knocking on their door and saying, hey, do you want to tokenize these things? And we're not the first to tokenize RECs. There have been previous efforts that didn't work out very well. Some are crypto skeptic, some are very excited. There's a pretty wide range.
What were the previous attempts and why did they fail? Or you don't have to tell me what they are, but like, why did they fail? What is your belief of why they didn't work out?
The small reason they didn't work out is liquidity. The big reason, I think, then the question is, so why couldn't they get liquidity? And I think the answer to that is they opted for private chains.
Classic. Bad move. I've seen that so much. It's everybody thinks, oh yeah, I can have my own private chain, everything's fine. And then it's like, there's no liquidity infrastructure. Even if you did have liquidity infrastructure, it would not be battle tested. And then you're just going like, oh, wow, thank you for giving me like the same amount of risk with like none of the assurances of public blockchains. That's just like, great, thank you.
Exactly. Like you don't get any of the benefits of DeFi. You don't get access to the battle testing of public infrastructure. You don't get the consumer grade user experience of public blockchains. You don't get the accessibility explicitly. Like that's kind of the point. Like why do people build these private blockchains? Because they're optimizing for people who want a permissioned environment. I understand why they do it. They do it because they want to offer a fully permissioned environment. But ultimately, I think it's a original sin, kiss of death kind of thing start off on a highly permissioned space.
So as a follow-up to this, how are you thinking about permissioning? Because like ultimately you as well have to do a bunch of permissioning. Like as Solid World, we've also seen similar kinds of challenges that, you as this legal entity that exists in real life has like a balance sheet and reporting requirements and accounts and all of this. Like you're kind of like straddling the line of like crypto and what the law actually requires. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so we permission at the bridge is our current philosophy, is that we permission at the bridge. So anyone can hold the asset, but if you want it retired in such a way that it would pass an audit, or if you want to bring assets onto the blockchain, or if you want to take assets off of the blockchain, you have to be permissioned. And so that's how our current KYC philosophy is sort of structured.
That's super reasonable. So essentially what this means is if you bring things into the system, if you take them out of the system, or if you use the thing to essentially eliminate it from the system, you need to be KYC'd. For it to be traded, for it to exist in a liquidity pool, whatever else, like it can live its own perfectly nice, great life in the middle. But ultimately, when it interacts with Jasmine Energy, the legal entity, you need to know who it is.
Exactly. If there's value coming onto or off of the blockchain, you need to be a permissioned entity. If you're shifting value around on the blockchain in that immutable, fully monitored space,
Yeah.
then all comers welcome.
Yeah, this is something I really find annoying about people that don't really get the whole blockchain thing, is that they feel like it's somehow like opaque, you can't see what's happening inside, you don't know where it's been. Like, no, you kind of know where it's been. There are like 10 different service providers telling you even what exchange the money came from, which bought the thing.
Yeah.
Like, we can track down everything to like a molecule. Like, it's not rocket science at this point.
I think that's the way the regulation is going to go in the long term. Is it's, all of the, if it's happening on a transparent blockchain, then that, is a relatively low permission space, and then all of the ways into or out of that space. And that's sort of the
Yes.
trade-off. TradFi, you have a highly permissioned space, but everything you do there is private. Like if you're trading on NASDAQ, you don't know who your counterparty is. You don't know. Yeah, it's just that all you know is that they have permission to be doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then the trade-off is in DeFi, everything is monitored. You know who everyone is. You can see everything that everyone is doing, but you may not know the identity of the counterparty. But you know everything about them.
Yeah, exactly. There's a perfect paper trail you could point to, like, if there was a legal issue, I would ask this exchange because I know the money came from there. Like, and they know who this person is because somebody had to let them get into, like, our perfect, blockchain in the middle. All of this works and exists today. And you're right on the regulation side as well. Like, that's what the FATF essentially suggests right now, right? Like, it's you as this kind of virtual asset service provider. If you're providing any like services or you're letting people come on chain, you need to know who your customers are. Once they touch the blockchain, that's not your problem anymore. But when they come back, you really need to check like what they've done. Like, that's about it.
Yeah. And the other leg of our bridge is in these government regulated registries, right? So it's like ERCOT has also run KYC on everyone who has a account on ERCOT.
That's a pretty high quality guarantee, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you go a little bit more into that? I don't think everyone would be familiar. Like, what does that mean?
So these 9 registries I was talking about, they're all run by, with the exception of like 2, they're all run by these government entities or these private public partnership entities like ERCOT. One's for PJM, there's one for California, there's one for North Carolina. So they do their KYC, right? So to get an account on one of these registries is like difficult and expensive and requires a lot of verification. And so you can't even use our bridge unless you already have an account in one of those places. And like we identify you by linking your identity to that registry account.
Got it.
That gives you so much good basis for everything. I love that for you.
Yeah. It's a way, way higher bar than, for example, like having a bank account.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So like at the end of the day, Coinbase tracks you back to a bank account, right? And they're able to like link you. We link you to one of these registry accounts, which is like a much higher identity bar.
From my experience, Carbon Registry is also kind of the same. They end up asking you like 10 times more questions than the bank.
Yeah.
So in terms of providing liquidity, how would one do that? And what are the incentives to do that on your platform?
Yeah, so today it's LP fees is basically the only incentive that exists today. And we're the main one providing liquidity just because we want to like help the market boot up. So like we're using our equity capital as the source of liquidity. And I think we'll become a lot more sophisticated about that. Today we're trying to validate the basic idea that if there were a liquid exchange, people would use it, right? And then we can get into DeFi, financial abstractions, and high quality liquidity provisioning incentives, those sorts of things, like having other sort of LP incentives. I think that this sort of question of how do you incentivize liquidity and where does the liquidity come from is the make or break for these kinds of projects. But at the same time, it's not been our highest priority to date because we're at the stage of just validating that we can stand this up and the registries won't freak out.
Yeah, it's a chicken or egg problem, right? Because also liquidity exists to serve a customer.
Yeah.
You need the customers and you need the liquidity. Both of them need to exist. But if you don't have customers, there's very little purpose to have liquidity. So it's kind of like this vicious cycle. Like one of the two sides needs to come first, ultimately.
Yeah, and so we're sort of faking the liquidity side and going and getting real customers while faking the liquidity side. And then once we have real customers, we can come back and do something more real and scalable on the liquidity side.
Who are your customers? Who do you anticipate? Who are you aiming at?
We have a list pinned up in our Notion. It's like 7 user groups that we think about. I won't go through all of them, but the biggest one we're going after today is the broker trader.
Mm-hmm.
So the space is very intermediated.
Yeah.
So if you're a generator, a generator does not go to Google and directly sell Google renewable energy for their server farm. That rec will pass through 3, 4, 5 hands before it gets to Google. So those groups are the ones we're going after. In the same way that carbon feels like it's at an inflection point as far as becoming a like real commodity category, recs are also in the same place, where we talk to people who do metals and grains commodities, and they're setting up their climate desk, or they set up their climate desk in 21 or 22, right, in the last couple of years, and they're now moving into recs. And so we talk to them. They're very excited about, like, I don't want to learn all of these different registries, and I don't want to have to do technical interop with all of these different registries. And so they can operate on Jasmine as an abstraction.
Exactly. They have their clients. They have like a list of clients who they serve. And ultimately it's like, they're just asked like, hey, go and source me this and try to make sure it makes sense. Ultimately, they now have Jasmine Energy to be there and say, hey, I figured out the rest of it. Like, this is what our price currently is. You can go look for a better price if you want to, but like, we have this right now, immediately on sale right now.
Yeah, here's the market price, and here's how much you can get, and move the price less than 1% or whatever their sort of liquidity threshold is. And then on the other side, there are groups who would like to make it a one-click operation for Google to buy climate commodities. And so those are like our integration partners, and we work with them so that they can offer RECs at an on-chain price, live, one-click buy, directly integrated into business processes, however those businesses want to think about it. And then there is the generator, who has sold their PPA, or maybe they've earned out their PPA and they have extra recs, or they need to top off a little bit, like they've underperformed. Maybe there was a hailstorm and the solar panels got knocked over and they're going to underperform this month unless they get their hands on some recs real quick to true up their PPA. So those sort of generators and the people who manage the P&L and like manage the business of running a generator.
Got it. So interestingly, it sounds like one of your key groups are the broker traders. Could you make the argument that to some degree, if this catches on, Google and the generators are on the system, that we would be disintermediating, that we would be replacing those broker traders? Like, this would be an alternative to even having one.
So when finance and commodities went through the digital transformation between the 70s and the 90s, right, we saw the hollowing out of trading floors, right? There used to be trading pits. And I've been to what used to be the Chicago Mercantile Exchange trading pit. It's now owned by a company called Peak 6. And it's just like 30 people with huge computers doing digital options trading, right? Like the commodities, there are no commodity floors anymore. And this is sort of that was the digital transition. And now we're going through the decentralization transition. And we're seeing the same thing, right? It's a wave of disintermediation. And if brokers could coordinate as a class, they might want to prevent this from happening. Right. But every individual broker wants to use the system. Wants to use the new thing, even if it harms them as a class.
Yeah, it harms them as a class, but ultimately they still have their customers. They have everything in the middle. The game theory is that actually this benefits them individually in the short term, because
yeah, exactly.
It's essentially like a decentralized trading partner. It's like having a new book, essentially, just, that you can always access.
Right.
But in the long term, it'll definitely do a lot of this intermediation. But in the short term, that's a very good business, actually, to be in.
Yeah, you want to be there first.
Yeah, exactly. You have an advantage over your competitors if you do use it.
Yeah, it's the triumph of the commons.
Yes.
instead of the tragedy. Like, it's one of these, like, it's the good side of the tragedy of the commons.
So let's assume broker dealers are the one, but yeah, these brokers are the ones, traders are the ones pushing it, right? Like they're the ones that push the initial wave. They're able to get very great and convenient quotes, and they're able to match buyers and sellers. And ultimately, what happens is this takes off and liquidity is established, and then Google realizes, hey man, like I can just go to this marketplace and I can click a button. And so then that's kind of the grand idea. Where does retail fit into all this? Do you anticipate dunderheads like Rez and I going on and being like, we want to buy some RECs today?
Yeah, so the EPA from very early on saw this as something that consumers should be involved in.
Mhm.
They want end consumers to be able to buy RECs, right? And they recognize the technical difficulty of them doing that, and so they encouraged local utility companies to set up to package these products for retail to be able to say things like, my house is 100% solar powered, or whatever. Or on the other side, for people who have solar on their roof, to give them a way to sell their RECs that might be, would have been difficult in the 90s. So we see both sides of that becoming disintermediated. We see individual consumers on the spot market first being able to do things like, for themselves, buy enough RECs to make their electric car fully renewable, right? Both like directly through our app and then through integration partners, helping individuals like make those claims, as opposed to the current way it was done. It's like 100% through your utility company. There's no like legal reason it needs to be that way, but it's just, who else are you going to buy your electricity from?
Yeah, it's essentially like a monopoly in that sense. And also, like, yeah, you could go up to like a broker or a trader, but your volumes are so low that it would cost them more money to do like, basic checks that we're dealing with a like legal person than it would for them to sell you the thing.
Exactly. And then on the other side, there are home generators, right, who are creating RECs and selling them at a real rip. Like if Tesla puts solar panels on your roof, Tesla's keeping your RECs and you never hear about them.
What? No way. No, what? No, say that again. Tesla is stealing your RECs?
Yeah, Tesla takes the RECs. Like, it's just not discussed. Tesla's listed in like different state Teslas. If you go on these registries, Tesla is a big REC seller into a lot of the compliance markets, because it's just like, they just don't talk about it, but they take all the RECs. If Tesla puts solar panels on your roof, and it's true for any solar installer, they put solar panels on your roof, they keep them. And that doesn't need to be the case. People can claim their own RECs and sell them into the market themselves. There's this aggregation problem that people are going to need to come to terms with, because every generator, you don't want to list just your house. Like, you might want to get together with your neighborhood or your city and like list as a group. But the big hurdles there are like these coordination problems that blockchain and markets help solve.
Fascinating. I love it. So essentially, is this value even being kicked back to like the people that are getting solar panels installed on their roofs? Or is this just like an unexpected windfall?
Yeah, only very abstractly. If you say things like, oh, the utility company making more money somehow lowers rates. Like, you have to make that kind of argument to say that the value is getting back to them.
Oh my God.
There was just a big settlement in the DC area of people like suing the utility, and then the judge saying like, you didn't provide people enough access to their RECs and you didn't sign the paperwork correctly, so they can come and claim their RECs if they want them.
Oh wow, this is a fascinating topic, because I've always heard like that Tesla benefits from some sort of credits in the US space. Is this what people mean?
This is one of them.
Like, what's the other scheme?
This is a big one.
Yeah, okay.
The other one is the cars. So this is like the solar panel part of Tesla, right? The car part of Tesla gets a bunch of credits for, I forget what the fleet credit is called, but when you sell someone a solar car, the government kicks in like $7,000 or something for the first million electric cars you sell. The federal government, state governments kick in a subsidy when you sell someone an electric car. So that's another big subsidy that Tesla gets. But yeah, so on both of those sides. And some of these RECs can be extremely valuable. So the DC ones are, like, you can see on our website, the voluntary REC that companies buy to offset to like make their facility solar, those are going for like $250 to $3. Compliance RECs in the DC area go for like $400, $450.
What?
So literally 100, 200, 300 times more valuable.
In the DC area?
Yeah, like Delaware.
Wait, at that point, are you generating more money from the RECs than you are from a solar? Oh, wow.
Way more money. So the RECs are the most valuable part of a solar panel. Like you see a solar panel on the White House, that is generating more revenue from its RECs than it is from its electricity.
My mind is absolutely blown right now. Wow.
We mentioned Delaware. By the way, before we started recording, Rez and I, we have a conspiracy that Delaware doesn't exist. Maryland and Delaware don't exist. And Dalton, I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove it right now.
Okay, prove it to me. Prove it to me.
Name one person, you do it out loud, that you know that's from Delaware or Maryland. You can't name one. You've never met a person from Delaware or Maryland.
The obvious one is Joe Biden.
He doesn't exist.
Right? He was a senator of Delaware.
This strengthens my argument. You've named a politician.
Is he in on it?
He's in on it. Outside of Joe, like I've never met a person from Delaware or Maryland. I've lived in the U.S. my entire life. And the viewing audience, I challenge you. Some guy's gonna like leave a comment like I'm from Delaware, and then we have to respond like scammer,
bot,
yeah, ban. That's wild, man. $400 for a rec. Like, well, let's start putting panels up in on the White House. How do we do that? When do we start?
So another thing with the sort of disintermediation, it gets more products built to make this more consumer friendly, make it easier for individuals to participate in both the buy side and the sell side of this market. And that also happens with the forwards. So forwards, as with carbon, you get a really good deal on those. If you're willing to buy them and you know how to price them, you can get a really good deal on forwards. But enabling consumers to do things like buy a lifetime supply of RECs for their Tesla when they buy their Tesla, or a lifetime supply of renewable energy credits when they buy an electrical appliance, like that kind of co-packing is going to become possible.
Incredible.
And whether that's like a side product that's sold directly to the consumer, or if GE it gets involved in co-packing renewable energy credits with home appliances, like I think that's going to be a big trend as well.
Wow.
And then it's because that you get the benefit of the forward financing, which, like I said, the returns on those REC forwards are really good if you know how to price them.
Would you see yourself maybe getting into solid world territory with forwards on RECs?
REC forwards is something that we're taking very seriously, because it's kind of so a PPA, that document I said before, there's basically two things in it. One is REC forwards and the other is bulk energy forwards. And that's more or less all that's in that document. There's like force majeure and other like legal contract stuff. But as far as assets, those are the assets that are in there as bulk energy and REC forwards. So we want to fully decompose that document so that they can be more efficiently priced. Today, you call up a broker, you tell them what you're building, you show them the site. Hopefully this is the third or fourth time you've done this, so you've got a good relationship with that banker. But they're kind of pricing this from the seat of their pants. Like there is no good market to go look at and actually know what one of these things would be worth.
Yeah.
And we want to get that fully decomposed so that when you're getting ready to break ground on a facility, or you can go the other way, right? You can go to the market and say, where should I build this facility and how big should it be? And you can look at the energy and REC forwards market to see, and then you can go and within a year have it cited, approved, and be selling your forwards into that market.
Well, I know a guy that knows a few things about forwards. So if you ever need to have questions, I can put you in touch with him. No, that seems really cool. So you had mentioned your website. What does success look like? You guys launch. What does success look like for you guys, like say in a year? Like what are your metrics of we've succeeded?
Organic liquidity and transaction volume. If we can demonstrate good transaction volume, then that's sort of the proof point that we need to go and take the company to the next level and grow out into forwards, grow out into other parts of renewable energy finance.
Love it. We didn't ask this. What chain are you on?
Polygon.
Love
the
it.
best.
The best. The only one.
The one with ReFi in it.
What's your decision process on that? I mean, that seems to be the popular choice now, and I co-sign that, but why is Polygon the choice?
So we were making this decision about a year ago, and Slima was going strong, and we were looking around at like where was the ecosystem for this. And this was us learning about ReFi at that point. and we were, so there's those sorts of things about like, where's our community, like where are the people who would be interested in this, where are they hanging out? And then there's the more still strategic but that don't depend on anyone else kind of questions, like the properties of the network, right? So fees, security level,
services,
wallet quality. Yeah, and all signs pointed towards Polygon. Like it's low fees, high quality infrastructure and experience, and it's where the ReFi community was growing the fastest. And so it was at that level, it was a pretty easy choice.
Love it.
We also I took Cosmos really seriously and like launching our own chain. All of the L2 stuff was heating up, so we took a pretty serious look at Stark and Optimism and Arbitrum, and just decided it wasn't there yet. And on Cosmos, we just decided that launching our own chain at that point was like
more friction.
Yeah, it is an unnecessary challenge. We don't need to do the triple backflip. We just need to like stick the landing right now.
Makes sense.
Yeah, obviously, like some cases where you definitely would want to have your own blockchain, but ultimately, for most products, you at least don't start out there. Like that's not the need, right?
Exactly. So that was our thought process that landed us on Polygon, and we're real happy with it. Polygon's had a great year.
Absolutely. Awesome, man. Rez, I don't know if there's anything else you ask. Dalton, anything you want to cover? Any final words?
I have a goofy final story, but I'll let Dalton.
No final comments. I think we covered the field.
All right. So coming back to the fact that we were discussing that some states in the US are not real.
Yes.
It reminded me of, like, if you guys have heard about the SCP mythos or the Secure, Contain, Protect. It's essentially like a modern day sci-fi co-writing project. But one of those is Free Portlands, which is the fact that Portland, as the place that everybody thinks Portland is, doesn't exist. Like when you drive there are just people in other cities next to it that think that they live in Portland. Nobody lives in Portland. Portland isn't there.
Isn't there one about Norway or like?
Oh, there's one about Finland. Finland, there's a famous like Reddit post, which was basically, the question was, what is the most insane thing your parents believe? To which the response was, my parents believe Finland as a country does not exist, and it was invented by the Japanese to do more whaling in the location where Finland is, and that's why it's called Finland, haha. And really, there is no such thing. It's just a political invention. There's actually like a whaling territory over there.
Yeah.
That tracks.
Yeah, like I live like 100 kilometers from Helsinki, but yeah, checks out. I guess I've been to Norway,
Yeah, Japan needed another country to be into whaling. Like, so they just invented a prosperous European country that's also into whaling. I mean, that definitely,
Yeah.
Heard it here. And we needed a state for our president to come from. Our, what do you call it?
So you couldn't run background checks like everybody's paid.
Our robot president to come from. So we've invented a place that he's supposedly from.
You can't like be nepotistic,
right,
and like favor your state if you're from a state that doesn't exist.
That's right, man, 100%.
It's the ultimate neutral state.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, same thing with Hawaii, right? Like you can't pick favorites.
Yeah. Hawaii doesn't exist either. None of these states exist as far as I'm concerned. We live in Finland. Awesome. Well, I think we covered it. We look forward to updates and best of luck, obviously. We'll catch y'all in the next one. Remember to ape responsibly. Peace, dudes and dudettes.